Hi, everyone, and welcome to GLF Live. I'm Gabrielle Lipton, the editor of Landscape News for the Global Landscapes Forum, and today we are here to talk about how nations are coming together to fight two of the most pressing land issues of our time, desertification and drought. While these two types of land degradation have historically followed their own natural cycles, climate change and biodiversity loss are accelerating their processes, making them more threatening, even life-threatening, to more of the world's population. As we speak, East Africa is experiencing an unprecedented drought that could leave upwards of 20 million people facing hunger. In 3 weeks' time, world leaders will gather in the capital of Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan, to agree on ways to tackle these issues at the 15th session of the Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, also known as the UNCCD COP15. And today we are extremely fortunate to have with us here the new UNCCD Deputy Executive Secretary, Andrea Metza Murillo, to share with us more on these degradation challenges and what the COP15 seeks to achieve. Ms. Murillo previously served as Costa Rica's Minister of Energy and Environment, and before that comes from a sustainable development career that spans 2 decades, 15 countries, and a number of directorships in her field. She is a lawyer by training and brings a very sharp eye to policymaking and negotiation processes. So we're so grateful to be able to have her here with us for a few minutes today. So welcome, Ms. Murillo. Thank you so much for joining us to share your insights.
Thank you, Gabrielle, and thank you for the invitation. It's always a great opportunity to have these platforms and spaces to do this exchange of knowledge, of visions. And we're facing challenging times, but we have the solutions there.
Yes, and we can't wait to hear some of them from you today. And thank you especially for making the time in advance of COP15. I can imagine that you are in the thick of preparations for these important negotiations. So what are some of the main outcomes you would like to see from these conversations that are set to happen in Abidjan?
Yes, thank you. And when we gather in a COP, it's where we have a great opportunity to have a framework to catalyze international cooperation and collaboration and action. And this is what this COP15 is about. It's about catalyzing action and bold commitments, political commitments in two main areas that are critical right now if we want to address desertification and land degradation, which are land restoration on one hand, and of course, drought. So from our perspective and what we would like to see, and we know that the parties will gather, we will have a lot of science and information coming in. But then how can we translate this information that science is generating and giving us into action, into policies? And this is what the COP15 is about. We will be there receiving a lot of information in these two areas. We know that right now, about 40% of the global land area is degraded already or degrading to very extents and degrees. This is a huge challenge for human beings, for economic activities. And now we know and we are clear that protecting nature, which is a critical part of any strategy, it's not enough. We also need to start with a lot of land restoration as well. The good news on this part of the story is that there are many initiatives happening in the different countries. We have more than 120 countries that have committed to the land degradation neutrality goal, and they are implementing plans. And they are implementing a lot of actions at the local level. We also have the Bond Challenge and other initiatives, such as the 20 by 20 initiative, which brings at the end a great framework to see different projects in different scales, in different regions happening. And this is what we need at the end when we're talking about land restoration. We know that we need to have this whole of a government approach. It's about land use planning. It's about conservation and protection. It's about doing landscape management. So combining and bringing all these different areas will require different stakeholders, the engagement of different stakeholders, the engagement of different ministries at the national level. And we know that we have different strategies. We also have the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. And I will say that all these different strategies generate hope. And we know that we're facing a lot of challenges, but it's good to see that we also have the possibility and that we're seeing a lot of local action happening. Of course, we need more action. We need to mobilize more resources. We need to mobilize financial and technical resources to the different countries. This is always a must. But the good news is that we have technical knowledge there and commitment from the different parties. Now, the other aspects, as I was mentioning, it's around drought. And we're seeing also that around 50 million people, listen, I think that when we hear these numbers, it's huge, right? That 50 million people globally are directly affected right now by droughts every year. And again, this is not only affecting human lives, and at the end, it is a matter of life or death in some cases, but it also has an impact in the economic activities. So this will, at the end, we know that the challenges are there. We know what the problems are, but we have the COP and we have this COP15 as a great opportunity to bring leaders, political leaders, to bring business representative, to bring civil society to catalyze this global action.
Thank you. There are so many important points that you just made. From the economic impacts of drought to the government action that's needed to the two challenges of drought and restoration. And I really appreciate your optimism on the restoration front and bringing attention to the actions that are already being taken through the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, the 20 by 20 initiative, AFR 100, and so on. So we really hope to see some more action come out of this COP and more commitment to these efforts, because as you said, just protecting is not enough anymore. So I'd like to pivot back to your career a bit. You just landed at the UN headquarters in Bonn only 2 weeks ago. You come from a fabulous career in Costa Rica. And during that time there, you really helped catapult Costa Rica to the forefront of countries who are really implementing restoration and conservation in a really incredible way. It has such a rich history of succeeding on these fronts. So how are you and will you apply learnings from your country to others through your work in your new role at the UN?
Well, thank you for the question. And yes, just 2 weeks here, but very excited and with a lot of dreams, because I'm very clear that this is an existential challenge as well, and that we can bring all this experience and knowledge to collaborate with a great team that we have here at the UNCCD. And first, I will say that in Costa Rica, we have been seeing that nature and land, and when we're talking about nature, it's about understanding its linkage to land and soil. It's an asset, and it's a galvanizer for economic activities. At the end, the country was the country with the highest deforestation rate about 30 and 40 years ago, and we managed to stop that by recognizing the importance of working with farmers and landowners of the forest and the land, generating clear a legal framework and policies, and generating incentives to change that pathway, that destruction pathway, into a positive and beneficial cycle. I will say that it's important to understand that every country and every region is different, that we can, exchange this kind of approaches, but we understand that at the end, it's in every country and in every region, everyone will be developing its own proposals and solutions. In our case, it was about that, seeing long-term planning, it's critical, giving incentives, it's critical, and then also understanding that these needs whole of society approaches. And Costa Rica, for example, is the only country in Latin America that established the Land Degradation Committee, or CADETI is how we call it. And it is a government, civil society, and academia structure platforms that works together to address and to implement the different plans that arises within this convention. And it is a great platform where you see the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture planning together how to work in degraded watersheds, for example, and defining a specific projects, identifying projects to work with the farmers in different scales. So I will say that what are some of the experiences and the visions that policy matters, that it is important that we try to bring this, what science is telling us, and transform this into policies, into legal frameworks, that we also need to have the clarity that it's very important to have the economic perspective, that we need to generate incentives. It's about giving the right signals to the markets, understanding that land, that nature are assets, and that we need to protect them and manage them in the right way. Otherwise, we're losing money and we're losing the base of life and of ecosystem services. And that at the end, it's about understanding that this requires whole of a government and whole of society approaches.
Mm-hmm. Thank you again for that really beautiful answer. And seeing land as an asset, providing those incentives. And I think a really important point you made is bringing together people from different sectors, especially in the government, to work together. And you mentioned agriculture and environment. After COVID, we started to see environment and health come together a bit more. So hopefully these multi-sectoral approaches can continue to be scaled up as we go forward. Another question I have is that one of the biggest misperceptions about drought is that it occurs naturally, and it has for a long time, but it's also increasingly human influenced. So can you expand on this a bit more and explain why it's so important to correct this false narrative?
Yes, for sure. And thank you. I think this is a brilliant question. And thank you for the opportunity of addressing this part. Droughts have always been part of human and natural systems. I mean, we need to understand this part. But what we are experiencing right now, it's what we are calling anthropogenic droughts. Why anthropogenic droughts? Because they are directly related to climate change. So what we are seeing now is that climate change is having a clear impact in the frequency, in the intense, even in the severe impacts that we are facing of droughts all over the world. And the other important issue is that it's to understand that there is no country or no region that are not facing these problems one way or the other, or with more intensity than other regions. So what we are seeing is this. We're clear that climate change is generating these new challenges, again, related to droughts, is generating then more risk, again, to human lives, to economic activities. And even in some regions, and I was reading some of the data, and I think one of the, for example, of the elements that really surprised me is to see that Western United, in the region of the US, of the Western United States, has been experiencing driest period in more than 1,000 years, which, wow. I mean, I think it's incredible when we see and when we look at these numbers. And the element is, yes, imagine a big country like the US facing this huge challenge. At the end, it has the technology, it has the economic resources to face this. But when we have this kind of situations in developing countries, then the story is totally different. And normally what happens is that you have migrations, and then you have social instability, water scarcity, and then again, a circle of destruction. This is how I would call it, that can be then very challenging to good governance, to any economic activity. So I think it's really a huge challenge. It's really understanding that that desertification, that land degradation, it's really, again, a huge challenge for any activity. And that the climate change part is then accelerating its impacts, its intensity. So this is what we're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. I think the ripple effects of human-caused drought are just so enormous and growing, and they often don't meet the eye. So yeah, thank you for pointing out some of those.
And Gabrielle, if I may add, this is just another numbers, because when we see like specific data or specific numbers, then we start to connecting the dots and realize how big is this challenge, and the importance of really having, of raising awareness and bringing the political attention that this deserves. Droughts in the last decade alone are estimated to have costed nearly 150 billion across the world. Imagine the money that we have been investing in this devastation processes, that could be invested in other activities at the end, and that we are now investing in the effects of facing droughts. And again, it is then very critical when you have these impacts in countries that have the capacity to address them than in countries that don't have the technical, economic, or human resources to face them.
Yeah, and especially now when economic resources are continuing to become scarcer and scarcer. It just
absolutely after the pandemic. I mean, the budgets, the public budgets, and believe me, I was there in the country facing the pandemic, the COVID, having very small fiscal space, and then it's very hard then to make decisions, to understand or to prioritize that, and then you have a natural disaster like a drought, and then you're facing again another situation where it's all the time having an impact in your development model, and it's like an extra burden to countries that really are trying to do their best to give better opportunities to their citizens, and sometimes they're just facing this natural and human conditions there.
Yes, and thank you for also pointing out the importance of stating some of these numbers, stating some of these facts to give people visuals and imagery and just get a sense of the scale of these land degradation challenges that, yes, in many parts of the world go unnoticed, but do affect the countries that are already struggling the most and don't need these vicious cycles to affect them even more. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I know you are in the thick of preparing for COP15. So to respect your time, we'll go to the last question here, which is, how should the negotiations in Abidjan around these challenges that we've talked about today influence those at the climate COP, which is arguably the biggest COP, which will happen in Egypt later in the year? How do you want to see these conversations carry forward and affect future discourse?
And I will say not only the climate COP, but the biodiversity COP as well, that will also happen this year. First is about understanding that all the work that we are doing within Abidjan and what will happen in Abidjan has a close link and an interaction with what we can do and what can happen in both COPs, biodiversity and climate change. Why? Because it's about synergies. It's about understanding that we will not be able to achieve the climate goals if we don't protect nature, if we don't protect land, if we don't do land restoration. This is part of the package. It's about understanding this part. And at the same time, if we manage to do this land restoration process to restore 1 billion hectares all over the world, we will be able then to have to be protecting biodiversity as well, and to see the different effects, interrelated effects that we have when we have healthy ecosystems. We know that we will be able then to sequester carbon. We know that we will be able then to generate and to have access to water. We know that we will be able then to have food security. So are all these multiple benefits that are interlinked, and it's about understanding that if we have good and bold decisions and conclusions and processes that will start in Abidjan, then it will be easier to continue and achieve the goals that we need to see and to have in Kunming, in the COP in biodiversity, and in the COP in climate change. So it's about understanding that everything is interrelated, and that if we want to achieve the 1.5 goal, we need to protect land, we need to do land restoration, we need to protect nature, and it will be the way in which we will be also achieving and stop the destruction of biodiversity as well. So it's about understanding that it is this systemic approach, the one that we need, and that ambition and bold action here in Abidjan will also catalyze ambition and bold action in the other conventions.
Thank you. Yes, land is our foundation, and it absolutely is interconnected with all of these other goals that we have. And I do hope that what happens at the COP15 in Abidjan will just spark so much more change that will come throughout the year at these other negotiations. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I'm so grateful to have had this chance to converse with you and hear about what's to come and all the work that UNCCD is doing. Is there anything else you would like to add before we close?
Thank you for the opportunity, and to the different stakeholders, engage, visit our website. There is a lot of information that we are producing here at UNCCD, and this is a great opportunity to catalyze specific projects and action at the local level and do the transformational change that we have to achieve to guarantee a healthy and sustainable future for every human being and for the different ecosystems.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful message to end on. Thank you to everyone who watched and spent some time with us today, and we'll see you next time on GLF Live.